name ring bells in my motherfucking town. At the Audi lot, I'm trying to hold a couple down.
Yo, where's the weed at? I gotta take a rip quick. Tell me where the weed's at. What's good, everybody? It's your boy Rarri Vuitton, man. I'm back with another episode of Rarri Talks Rap. In today's episode, I'm gonna be talking about one of my favorite groups of all time. I'm gonna give you the whole story, the good, the bad, the ugly, the highs, the lows. I'm talking about the Kottonmouth Kings. So in order to tell the story correctly, first we're gonna have to jump back and talk about the history of the Kottonmouth Kings. Kottonmouth Kings were a group that were formed in a small town of Southern California called Placentia. They fathered a sound that some coined rip hop, which was basically a melting pot of hip hop, punk rock, reggae, you name it. What these guys are mainly known for was their identity that revolved completely around cannabis. This started back in about 1997. So you gotta understand that at this time, it was much more taboo to be on the forefront and be so vocal about cannabis legalization and making it their whole persona. I think California legalized cannabis medically in 1996. Around that time, it was really California, Colorado. The rest of the country, major no-no, extremely illegal. So the Kottonmouth Kings made it part of their Southern California persona to be at the forefront of weed legalization, to theme multiple albums, song titles, merchandise, you name it, around cannabis, lingo, terminology, culture. So originally, around 1997, Kottonmouth was started by two friends, D-Loc and Saint Dog. Now at the time, D-Loc and Saint Dog were just friends, right? D-Loc was a basketball player. According to him, Saint Dog would come to his basketball games. They would become friends shortly thereafter, hang out all the time. Eventually, they ran into and met Daddy X, or Brad Xavier, who was at the time a member of the band Humble Gods, and he was also a LA-based club promoter, a bit of a character within the scene of entertainment, nightlife, music. And Brad actually was friends with D-Loc's basketball coach. And according to D-Loc, Brad X would drive down to watch his basketball games because D-Loc is a self-proclaimed P-Town baller who claims he can dunk, which seems odd because he seems like a short dude, but hey, I'm not knocking it. Maybe he's got ups. Regardless, Brad X apparently was going down there, becoming friends with these guys, and eventually would bring them along to parties and different promotions and put them in front of all of his friends and say, hey, rap, you guys gotta rap. Show these guys that you can rap. He was the one that really pushed them to do this for real. So the Kottonmouth Kings got more serious, got to the studio, started recording demo tracks, and eventually they would be discovered and signed by Gary Gersh of Capitol Records. And this would lead to them making their first record, Royal Highness. Classic album right here. Definitely recommend. Now, Royal Highness mainly featured Saint Dog and D-Loc rapping. And at the time, again, it's important to note that D-Loc wasn't as much of a rapper as Saint Dog. Apparently, Saint Dog wrote a lot of D-Loc's raps early on, kind of taught him the structure of songs. And then throughout the album, you would see multiple different appearances from other artists, bringing in different genres. For example, Dog Boy bringing more like reggae elements to the tape. Then you would also have Daddy X, who would now become a member of Kottonmouth Kings, and he brought some of that punk rock into the fold as well. And then now you have DJ Bobby B, who was the DJ and guy making the beats for Kottonmouth at the time. I believe on the record it has a producer credit for Brad Xavier, meaning Daddy X was the producer of the album, but based on my research and understanding, I believe DJ Bobby B was responsible for a lot of the production and the beats on that first project. Don't want to forget Lou Dog either, as he was a part of this project as well. This is when the original Kottonmouth Kings were forming, becoming kind of the big super group. Johnny Richter, who fans know as a staple member of the group, was around very early on, but for whatever reason, kind of tapered off at that time. He would eventually rejoin the group, which I'll get to later. Now, things would pick up quickly for Kottonmouth Kings as this album would get them on the map. They had some really big lead singles like Bump and Suburbanite, which actually was featured on Scream 2's soundtrack, was probably their biggest placement. Now, another big piece of the Kottonmouth Kings story came in around this time. This man was Kevin Zinger, who was the CEO of SRH Clothing. From my understanding, he met the Kottonmouth Kings through some surfer buddies, would eventually become their manager, and played a huge role in their success over the years in growing the independent label. So with Kevin Zinger's help, Brad X and the Kottonmouth Kings would eventually create Suburban Noise Records, which was their independent label that they would go on to release records from for close to 20 years. Suburban Noise Records would have a joint venture deal with Capitol from about 97 to 2002. And after the success of their first album, Royal Highness, Kottonmouth Kings began working on their second album, High Society. Now, it was around this time, after the success of Royal Highness moving into the second album, High Society, that one of the founding important members, Saint Dog, would actually leave the group. Now, from what I've understood, Saint Dog had a pretty big personality. I think he had a hard time getting along with Brad X, and ultimately that led to Saint Dog bowing out of the group, whereas Johnny Richter, who I mentioned earlier, would officially come back into the group, and he played a really large role role on this second album, High Society, and a guy who was really responsible for a lot of the melodies, song structures, really kind of the backbone of the Kottonmouth Kings sound over those years. Now, something that's important to note is that the Kottonmouth Kings toured extremely heavily over the years. They would hit the road most of the year. They would play underground shows for a very cult following, very Juggalo adjacent, Tech Nine, kind of underground fan bases. They had a really exciting, fun, high energy live show. Stage props would have things like weed plants. Their live shows also featured another key member of the Kottonmouth Kings, who I'm not exactly sure when he came around, but that member is Pakalika. Pakalika was known for creating a hydromechanics style of pop blocking and dancing, and he was a tall, masked figure who kind of served as the Kottonmouth Kings mascot. Didn't say a lot of words, danced on stage, the crowd loved him, went crazy. Overall, between the live drums from Lou Dog, the spinning and scratching from Bobby B, the jumping around and the performing from the artists like D-Lo, Brad X, Johnny Richter, this provided a really exciting live show that helped them develop that cult fan base when they toured so heavily across the nation and across the world over the years. During the 2000s, the Kottonmouth Kings, like I said, would eventually become independent. They would have a lot of different releases from that point on, such as Rolling Stone, Fire It Up, the self-titled Kottonmouth Kings, Coast to Coast, Cloud 9, the Green Album, and lots of different singles and EPs sprinkled in throughout the way. Around 2010, Brad X brought in a new member to the Kottonmouth Kings, the Dirtball. Now, some of the other members, including D-Lo, have been on record saying that they didn't really understand that move, nor were they really asked about it. Brad X and the Dirtball were just friends, and he kind of brought him in and said, hey, we've got a new member of the group.
Dirtball. Brad X brought Dirtball into the band. It wasn't me and Richard's decision. We didn't know anything. I didn't know really anything about it. I didn't know anything about it.
Oh, wow.
They had a whole wreck. There was like all these songs written that I wasn't on. I'm like, wait, hold on a minute.
In my opinion, this was basically the beginning of the end for the Kottonmouth Kings. Now, as you can imagine with any band, this is a common theme in music. When you've got a group of guys together that are hitting the road, touring incessantly, always together, money's involved, egos are at play, obviously some tensions and some trouble will arise. Around 2010, another really big development within the Kottonmouth Kings happened, and that was the departure of Pakalika. He was so beloved by the fans and such a unique personality that it felt like a huge missing piece when he left the equation. From what I've gathered, they tried to put Pakalika on a salary instead of paying him equally as they were for the years prior. This obviously led to some feelings on Pakalika's end, where he ended up leaving the group. And tragically, 2 years later, Pakalika died and passed from an asthma attack. Apparently, he battled lots of asthma issues over the years, and it led to a cardiac arrest. So rest in peace to Pac. So after Pakalika leaves, we still see the Kottonmouth Kings put out a multitude of albums over the years. The first being Long Live the Kings as Dirtball's debut. Then you had Sunrise Sessions and a couple of other albums at this time that just were not very memorable to me as well. And then in 2013, another bomb drops as Johnny Richter announces on Twitter that he's leaving the group as well. There's plenty of different interviews and different takes out there. It's really hard to decipher and decide what went wrong, who was in the right, who was in the wrong, who's at fault. I will say that there was different things at play. Money, obviously, drug use. Many of the different members in Kottonmouth Kings had drug habits and drug problems over the years that led to erratic behavior. It was said that around this time, from multiple accounts, that Brad X, who was actually known for more as a gimmick and wasn't even really a partier or a weed smoker, he kind of just played the character and was the ringleader of the group. It was said that around this time, he actually started to develop a pretty nasty pill and opiate addiction, which led to some questionable decision making, and as Kevin Zinger put it, kind of spun him out.
As you guys know, like, Brad X was never a partier. He was never a fucking drug user. He fucking barely smoked weed. You know what I mean?
No doubt.
All the guys on the bus, like, he smoked fucking 5% of everybody else, right? So, like, when the hard drugs, you know, later in life, and it was his first, I don't know what you call it, but his first fucking interaction with them.
His first rodeo.
Yeah, I think it fucking spun him out, to be honest with you.
Obviously, there's a bunch of different accounts, a lot of different finger pointing within the crew over the years. However, Johnny Richter would leave, but this wouldn't stop. In 2013, this is when all the turmoil started with Daddy X, Suburbanite Records, and Kevin Zinger. Daddy X was accusing Kevin Zinger of shady business practices, including switching a bunch of trademarks into his own name behind the crew's back, not paying them correctly.
Then we find out that our trademark and domains have been transferred by our manager
from the Kottonmouth Kings to Kevin Zinger. KottonmouthKings.com, the Kottonmouth Kings trademark. Kottonmouth Kings YouTube is now in Kevin Zinger's personal name. I address him on this. Hey, this is not cool. This is Kottonmouth Kings property. Please return it. You're our manager. Why would you put it in your name? Well, I get the runaround. It took me 2 years to get KottonmouthKings.com transferred back over to the Kottonmouth Kings. Hearing stories of bad business being done from all the artists, lack of royalty reporting. So I want to start looking into it.
Daddy X was taking matters into his own hands, and he started a new label called United Family Music. They ended up releasing a couple of more albums like The Buddha Shack and Crown Power, and again, just not anything at this point that was interesting to any of the Kottonmouth King fans that grew up listening to albums like these two. So they would try to keep it going, of course. And in 2015, DJ Bobby B officially left the group as well, which if you've heard some of his interviews over the years, you can tell that he certainly feels some type of way about it and is still upset with how he was treated over the years, which is a shame to me because in my opinion, DJ Bobby B was a huge part of the Kottonmouth Kings and an unsung hero, even though he wasn't at the forefront like a D-Loc or Johnny Richter or Brad X. DJ Bobby B was a huge part of their sound and their growth and almost 20 years in the group. So ultimately with the Kottonmouth Kings, things just kept getting worse. Members were leaving left and right. They were almost unrecognizable as a group because things had changed so much that the end was inevitably near. They officially went on a hiatus around 2016, 2017, and that was kind of the last we would even hear from Daddy X. Over those next couple years, D-Loc would try to reform a group again. He would bring Saint Dog back into the fold, and they were trying to release a new full-length album called Kingdom Come, but that again was short-lived, and ultimately it just came down to D-Loc kind of running around saying that he was Kottonmouth Kings without any other members around him. Tragically, in 2020, original Kottonmouth Kings member Saint Dog passed away as well from what I believe to be some sort of a drug overdose. And at this point, that was basically the end of the Kottonmouth Kings. The drama wouldn't stop there though, as eventually it would come out that Daddy X, behind the backs of the other members, sold their entire catalog to something called Cleopatra Records.
Brad had the Kottonmouth Kings masters. He never paid anybody that was due a royalty on those masters. He never paid them out ever. And then about a year and a half, 2 years ago, he then took the masters, which we did very fair deals with bands. We did 50-50 deals where they owned half the master. He then went out and sold the masters to Cleopatra. And through that whole period, he never paid anybody that was due money from it, right?
So basically he took all the masters, sold them for a sum of money, kind of left people in the dark about this. I believe there were lawsuits from other members of the group trying to receive fair compensation for this deal with Cleopatra Records, but ultimately it seems that there was irreparable damage from multiple different angles within the Kottonmouth Kings. One of the nastier breakups of a band. It was very public, very messy, multiple different interviews, guys going online, spilling out different narratives, if you will. But if you fast forward to nowadays, the Kottonmouth Kings, or a rendition of them, are still out there touring, and I gotta give them credit. You got D-Loc, Chucky Chuck, Judge D, and Taxman still going out on the road, playing shows, doing their thing, trying to keep the name alive. Is it the same thing? Of course it's not. Will it ever be the same group with those guys? No. Also, these guys are getting old. They're in their 40s and 50s. I don't ever really see a reunion thing happening. It sounds like there's still tons of bad blood when it comes to Brad X. I don't really know the situation with Johnny Richter. He's popped in and out over the years. I last saw him around a couple of years ago. He was doing records with an artist on Suburban Noise called Stack Styles and Chucky Chuck, and I think he did a couple of shows or like a small tour with them. But again, I haven't heard much of Johnny Richter. I've heard speculation that he's battled some different addiction, drug and alcohol issues over the year as well. We'll never see the Kottonmouth Kings as they once were. We've lost a couple of our favorite members over the years, including Saint Dog and Pakalika. I give credit to D-Loc for continuing to try to push it out there. Ultimately, in today's world, it's just a thing of the past and something you just have to look back on, like me as a fan, and just appreciate. It was a fantastic group that did something new, cool, and unique. They get a lot of flack from like the mainstream and like music publications and whatnot for being some sort of weed gimmick, but if you really boil it down, especially some of those early albums, they made some really, really good music. In typical Rarri Talks Rap fashion, I'm gonna give you 10 songs that I love from the Kottonmouth Kings. Round and Round, The Lottery, So High, Suburban Life, Life Rolls On, 420, Tangerine Sky is a classic. You could play that for your mother. She would even enjoy that. Where's the Weed At? That was the first one I listened to, actually. When I was in high school, like I should, driving around in my friend's car, getting high, hotboxing, smoking weed for like the first time. He had subs. We're listening to the Where's the Weed At? That's when I was like, yo, Who the fuck are these guys? These guys are sick. Pack Your Bowls, I love that song. Life Ain't What It Seems. Those are some of my favorites, but again, I would just say if you've never really checked out the Kottonmouth Kings or you're curious about some of their records, I would start with Royal Highness and High Society. Those to me are their best work. That was kind of the prime KMK for me. I appreciate y'all watching. If I missed anything key in the timeline, drop a comment as well. I want to give a quick shout out too to some of the sources as I was looking up this information. There's a few really great channels out there that help document this stuff. One of which is Staunch TV. Shout out to Staunch TV for doing all this research. Another one is Fago Lovers. I was able to listen to a long interview with D-Loc where I learned a lot of really cool history about how the group started. ICP had that series about the rise and fall of KMK. Shout out those sources, appreciate them. Without further ado, this has been Rarri Talks Rap, Rarri Vuitton, brought to you by Suburbanite Records. Thanks for tuning in. Peace.